Hi, and welcome to The Existential Coach. This week, beginning of December, I want to talk about the paradox of choice. And this has come up in conversations I've had recently where we've been talking about the number of choices we have, the number of options we have, the experience of needing to pick and not wanting to choose, and how that can be overwhelming. Yet we'll say to ourselves, why am I getting overwhelmed? I shouldn't get overwhelmed. It's stupid that I'm getting overwhelmed. It's stupid that I'm feeling this way. And a language that's really oppressive, draconian, judgmental, alienating comes into our thought process. And we've gone from having a feeling about something, we are going to make a choice about something, we're thinking about the various different options, and we don't want to make the choice, and we feel overwhelmed. Yet the response we have to feeling overwhelmed is to tell ourselves we shouldn't feel overwhelmed. So in thinking about this experience of having an emotion and then telling ourselves we should not have that emotion, and then thinking it came about because we were thinking about choosing something, whatever it was that we were thinking about choosing, what we start to notice, or what I start to notice, is how we are at each point facing these choices in life, whatever they are, having an emotional response and then condemning ourselves for what our response is, which is a form of shame. So let me give a concrete example. I like to buy books, and so I will look for deals on books. If there's a sale, right now there's all these Black Friday sales, so I'll see that there's these discounts that are, better this time of year than any other time of year. And so I look at these books and I add them all to my shopping cart. And of course, it's not just one book or two books, but it starts getting larger and larger and larger, because I think, well, it's such a good discount and it's only going to happen once a year. And so the idea that I would choose one book or two books, let's say, seems problematic to me. It seems like, well, I can't just choose two. I mean, I shouldn't have to choose two. It's such a good deal. So why should I choose two? Maybe, why should I have to choose three? It's a really good deal. So let's just get the 4, maybe 5 now. Well, if I'm going to get 5, it's not really a big deal if I get 6. You know what? No more than 10. So what I'm kind of playing out here is a thought process that is pushing against this idea of boundaries, right? That there's this idea of, I'm going to just buy one book or two books, let's say, get the discount and move on. And I tend to think of it as, well, a financial issue. So for example, say, I really can't afford this. This will just be going on my credit card. So it's not like I have money in the bank. It's that I will be spending credit on this. So I don't actually have the money. I'm looking for a deal, and I want this deal because it's a Black Friday sale. I feel like this is an opportunity, a chance. If I get these books, I'll become a better person. I'll be associated with the community of authors that write these books, and I get to imagine myself as being a part of this community, and that feels really good to me, to feel like I'm a part of something that I really value, a part of something that I would love to be a part of, something that I think is really important, so on and so forth. So in short, something that embodies a great deal of meaning to me. So you can see how we've moved from a discount on a book to an existential question. Now, of course, this can be any item, right? So I could be looking at an extension bar, or power bar, or I could be looking at an espresso machine. I could be looking at coffee filters. I mean, you're getting a theme here. But it could be anything. It could be, I don't drive, but maybe somebody's looking at sale on car or car-related things. Maybe somebody's thinking about a subscription to something, that this time of year they can get a subscription to something online that's going to be cheaper than other times. So you can see how whatever it is, a person can start to think, okay, this is my time to act. I need to act. And within that, there's this imagining that if I can do this, if I can get what I want, then I can be free. Free from the paradox of choice. So, one of the things I mentioned earlier was how shame can play into this equation, that we can want something, feel that we want it, and then think, well, it's stupid, we shouldn't want that, we can't afford it, or it doesn't really matter, or whatever it is. And we start to notice that there's this kind of socialized form of shame that is going on. Now, shame, it's been written as a social function, right? The group can shame the individual into their role. So, if we were to imagine that we're in a situation where there's a small group of us and we're dependent upon each other for survival, and each one of us has a role that we play so we can survive, but one of us decides to not do that role for whatever reason, then the group can collectively, quote unquote, shame that person, letting them know that this is essential for the survival of the group. Now, it should be added that what we think of as shame, certainly in our modern context, is quite different than shame in the context I just described. Shame as a form of socialization. So, what we want to understand here is the distinction between shaming somebody for the purpose of oppression versus shaming somebody for the purpose of understanding a schism within a community. So let me explain this. So let's go back to this community. There's 20 of us, let's say, and one of us, me, is not doing what I should. And so the rest of the 19 of you engage in this kind of ritual shaming. But really what this is a way to reintegrate. My pulling away from the community was an indication to the community of my feeling alienated. So what you do is you indicate that the thing I've done is problematic, and then each one in the member tells me how much I mean to them. Each one in the community tells me how valuable I am to the community. Each member of the community celebrates me and themselves and our community. So notice how shaming is quite different than we tend to think of it in a modern context, where shaming in this other vein or this other light is about understanding a need, right? Understanding that there's this connection that has been broken, and that the shame is a form of awareness that we need to bring back in that which has been shunned or shamed. Again, not to put too fine a point on it, but this is very different than shame within a system that is oppressive, right? A system that is oppressive is based upon a hierarchical structure. People are shamed into their status, their position. They only have a certain amount of subjectivity based upon whatever the structure permits. This is quite different than what I was saying about a community that thinks in an egalitarian way about the relationship and the contingent relationship each one has to the other. In other words, shame in the context of we is very different than shame in the context of I. Now, if we go back to this idea of the paradox of choice, and we go back to me and my shopping cart filled with books, and my whole inner dialogue about I should be able to get this, I should be able to get that, and I want choice, and I want this, I want that. Well, one of the things that comes up is, and I mentioned this about freedom, is I want to be able to do what I want. Yet, freedom without any boundaries is not freedom, because what would I be free from? Freedom is always in relation to something else. So with freedom comes, in this sense, an ability to respond, or responsibility. And what that means is, in my freedom and my ability to respond, I'm engaged in a dialectical process between my enactment of free and the response to free. So it is a conversation. Freedom as tyranny, right? Which is to say, if I'm saying, well, I'm free to do what I want so I can exploit people and harm people, and it's just my feelings, and it's just what I want, or it's just the way the economic system works, or it's just the way the religious ideology works, or whatever it is, really that's not freedom, because I'm operating within a construct, economic construct, a religious construct, whatever it is. So within that, I am actually unfree, right? Because I'm operating within a structure that I am not questioning, I'm adhering to, therefore I am unfree. When we gauge in the responsible way, or the responsible way of understanding freedom, we get into a dialectical process. We get into a conversation with what freedom means. And if we walk this back to me and my shopping cart with books, and we say, okay, let's apply this idea of freedom and being responsible or responsible to my situation, right? So first thing I can ask is, I can say, well, on a financial level, do I actually have the money? Say, well, no. Okay. Pause. What do I feel in that moment? Do I, generally speaking, feel some form of shame? Do I feel in some way a sense of I should have money? I should be able to get these books or buy this, whatever it is. I should be able to do that, but I can't. So I feel a sense of shame. So it's not just that we've taken some things, put them into our shopping cart, and we want to get them, and we don't have money. It's that underneath that surface, that you can think of it like underneath the story, is a feeling that is driving my need to say, well, what if I got 1 book, 2 books, 3 books, 4 books, and so on? Well, it is a deal. So if I buy them later, it's going to cost more money, whereas if I buy them now, it's better. Am I not in some way having a conversation within this enactment of freedom where I'm trying to convince myself I can be free in spite of the circumstance, which is I do not actually have the money? And now let's move to another question. And my identity as being a part of this community of authors, let's say, that I can have these books by these great minds and so on, that is actually not my identity. In other words, the projection that is going on where I think I can be a part of this great thing to be free is just like I was saying earlier about the idea of adhering to an economic or religious ideology, which is I'm adhering to a structure of thought which by definition means I am unfree. And to respond to that, to be response-able to that, is to engage the dialectical experience or the conversational experience, the intrapsychic experience of what my own felt sense of shame is, that I should be free to do this, that I should be free of shame. Yet, I have not been able to step to, for whatever reason, that moment where I can say, I don't feel shame, which is why we tend to want somebody to make some kind of choice for us. Now, let's say nobody comes in and makes a choice for us, which is, I think, pretty common. We then, let's say I just give up. It's coming up on the deadline for the discount, and I just say, oh, well, whatever, I'll just do it. I'll do it and deal with it later. So what have I done in that moment? Well, I've turned away from this existential question, which is, I'm trying to be free in a system, which means I'm therefore unfree. I'm experiencing choice and the fact that I want to be able to do what I want because I think that's freedom, but it's in, again, a system. I want to avoid feelings of shame, which is I actually don't have the money. I want to avoid responsible responses because I'm thinking, well, I should have done this, I should have done that. I wasn't actually thinking forward in a way or being mindful in a way. I wasn't, going back to that idea of the community, I wasn't thinking in a communal way. I was thinking in a very moment-to-moment what I need right now way. So a very drive-based way, you could say. And that creates this feeling that I'm actually not a part of this larger question, this larger continuity, if you will, of life, which is a kind of experiencing of self within not a plan, but a relationship to things where we are not defined by those purely based upon external criteria. So, for example, going back to the economic or the religious idea that my existence isn't because of an economic system or because of a religious system. That instead, I am engaging in this conversation, this dialectical process that is dynamic, right? It's not that it's going to be fixed to this is what you do, this is what you don't do. It's not that rigid. Rather, it's understanding that within the process of me putting all of these books in a shopping cart because it's a Black Friday sale, I've actually engaged in a process where I'm trying to understand or have the potential to try and understand freedom/unfreedom within a context of an emotional state, as we talked about, shame, and how shame is affecting me and what I do to amend or resolve or in whatever way attune to shame. Do I attune to this ontological experience of angst, that I feel this ontological experience of alienation, and that from that comes this sense of responsibility that I am not responsible, hence I experience shame. So, if we think of it as I'm putting all of these books that I don't actually have the money for into a shopping cart, and I'm telling myself I can get them, and I think, well, it's dumb and I shouldn't and all these kinds of things. But what am I missing? I'm missing the shame. I'm missing the need to bring myself back into community, bring myself back into connection, bring myself back to a state where I feel connection. I've talked a number of times on this podcast about connection, and of course it's key. It comes up within an existential model, alienation, isolation. And we experience it in a variety of different ways. And because the Black Friday sale and because the holiday season, and there tends to be a great deal of shopping this time of year, and there can be additional pressure that we have, right? We need to get presents for people. We are spending more money. Maybe we're going out more. And so we think, well, if we don't do those things, we're maybe not good, we're maybe not free, we're maybe not, and we kind of bang into this paradox of choice, which is to say, I need to choose, I need to be able to do this thing, whatever it is, to feel free. But if I pick one and not the other, and this is the second main point, if I pick one and not the other, then really I'm engaged with this existential experience of change/death. Because if I have my 10 books in the cart and I decide, well, I'm only going to get 5, noting that I've already moved up from my original 1, but I'm only going to get 5. What I'm also doing is I'm not getting 5. So let's just make it even simpler. Let's say there's 2 books or 2 objects, 2 things that you want to buy. It's not that you're picking one over the other, it's that you're not picking one over the other. Notice the difference? Picking one over the other, not picking one over the other. Now, what emotional experience might this have? You say, oh, it's stupid, it's just a book, what's the big deal? You can buy it later. It's not like it's the last book, it's not this unique work in the sense that there aren't copies you can get later. Sure, it might cost you more, but you can still get it later. Even so, to not get it in that moment starts to tap into something related to how we attach, how we feel connection, how we imagine ourselves attached and connected. So I may well experience the fact that the book I'm not getting is a loss. I may well experience it as death. And you say, okay, well, that seems kind of extreme. You're just not getting a book. Well, this is where we get into understanding the difference between thinking about emotions and emotion. So let's take a look at a kid. And a parent says, oh, my kid had a meltdown. Well, maybe from the parent's perspective, but in the sense that a meltdown is really big, like a nuclear meltdown is catastrophic. But another way to think of it is the kid is having a pure emotional experience, an unfiltered emotional experience. They haven't been informed and instructed, interrogated, you could say, into constructing their identity within a reality that mitigates their emotional outbursts. So they grow up in a society, i.e. our society, that either legally or illegally endorses drugs as a way to mitigate such outbursts, for example. They grow up in a society that says, this is your issue as an individual to deal with. This is not our issue as a community to deal with. And if we jump back to the analogy I was giving to an earlier community or other communities and how they look at shame as a part of a collective experience versus how we use and operationalize shame now as an individual tool to get people back in line, we see that the way in which we look at emotion, the way in which we define and label emotion, speaks to how we understand, value, or in this case, don't value emotion. So the book that I'm not getting has an emotional component. You can say, well, it's not rational. And I would say, yes, it is not rational. It is emotional. And not only is it not rational, it's not rational to define emotions based upon rationale, in the same way that imperial and metric are different. So understanding that when we're talking about emotions, we're shifting into a totally different way of understanding our experience. It's another form of interpretation, which is to say we're interpreting things intellectually, we're interpreting things emotionally. Another analogy might be to think of this as, mechanical physics and quantum physics. And the main point being is there's different ways of understanding how we are oriented in our world, in ourselves. So in thinking about shame and emotion and this idea of freedom and the paradox of choice, we can kind of start to weave these together. I have an emotional response to my cart full of books that I am not choosing some books, therefore I am losing these books. I feel a sense of shame, like I should be able to have these books. And I should be a part of the community, and I should have what I want, and whatever it is that I'm feeling, that I'm mentalizing about this, is saying to me, I should have this, I don't have this, I'm bad for not having this. Then I start to feel guilty, I start to feel upset, I get anxious, I build myself up to a point where I just say, okay, well, I'm just going to get them. Now, I haven't addressed the shame issue, right? I've just come to some kind of answer, whatever it is, which maybe is delaying, so I get more debt in the process, more stuff goes on my credit card. I haven't understood that this choice is actually significant because I've rationally minimized it. I've said, well, it's a stupid thing. It's just books in a cart. It's just things on my Amazon page or whatever it is. And so that's dumb. So I haven't heard my emotions. So thus far I've shamed and not listened to myself. And now finally, when we get into this question of freedom, I haven't acknowledged that to desire freedom without being able to respond to the contingent reality of freedom is a form of denial. And it results in this kind of paradox of choice where I just came to some kind of giving up point, right? Where I just decided, okay, what I'm going to do here is just work myself to a point where I say, oh, I'll just get him. Or whatever it is that I decide. But notice how I'm not actually engaged in the process. So I'm oppressing myself from the actual experience of being response-able, right? Being able to respond to the challenges, the uncertainty, the paradox of freedom. Similarly, being able to respond to the paradox of choice, that each choice is a death. You can say, well, that's too much. Well, going back to the child and the unfettered understanding of what they're supposed to do, the child isn't having a mental breakdown. The child isn't having, a falling apart. What they are doing is expressing emotion in its most pure form. That we have become detached from it means we then tell the child, oh, you need to control that form of emotion. Similarly with people, if somebody says to me, I was going to buy all these books or all of these whatever, clothes or a car or blah, blah, blah. And I was freaked out and upset and angry. And I thought, why can't I have this? And why can't I have that? And I said, that's stupid. How much understanding do you think there is? Not of the surface, right? The idea of there's this object we're talking about, a book, a car, a coat, or whatever it is. Rather, an understanding of the emotional significance of what is going on. How much do you think the emotional awareness is prevalent in our thinking? Well, I would say it's not. And I would say that that's the thing that we're facing, is understanding that the paradox of choice and the paradox of freedom involves an emotional attunement to the effect of what we're experiencing rather than the cognitization of what we're supposed to do or the socialization of how we're supposed to act or the cultural dimensions of what is right or wrong. In other words, in order for us to understand our embodied experience, if we engage in a process of shaming that comes from an externalization of our experience, right, whatever the cultural ideas are, the social ideas and so on, religious and economic, like I mentioned earlier, whatever they are, if we are not going to look at our own experience, then we are actually alienating ourselves. We are engaged in a form of shaming that does not say, come back in. You are one within yourself. You can feel safe within your body. You can feel within your embodied self these experiences. So whether it's a shopping cart, it's a need to have a drink, whatever the behavior, there is this, if we adopt this understanding, there is this way in which we can engage our emotions that doesn't pathologize them as being this thing we shouldn't do that much, and instead says it's something that is, period. It's just what is. And in recognizing what is, we can start to think about how and in what way can we shape our experience to be inclusive to the emotional reality of our lives. So, there still is the pragmatic question, am I going to buy all these books? Right? Am I going to just give up and say I'm going to buy these books? Well, let's say I do. What actually happens? I get a bunch of books. Have I understood anything about my experience? Have I come to a deeper understanding of the paradox of choice? Have I come to a deeper understanding of the paradox of freedom and my emotions? I don't see this as something that we answer. I see this as something that we engage. And in the same way that we engage that individual in the community who is vital to the community, who is going through something and feels alienated and pulls away from whatever their duties and responsibilities are, and we instead celebrate what they mean to us in the community, I see that as something we can model within ourselves. That we can celebrate within our own experience, that we have these rich, vibrant emotions, and that our need for connection, for love, to be valued, carries forward. And that our ability to respond in this way to ourselves is freedom. This ability to respond in this way within our own experience is freedom. The measure of freedom is expressed through our responsibility, our response ableness to explore that which we are experiencing. And the greater the exploration, the greater the freedom within this conversation we experience, rather than looking at it as this thing we need to get from some external structure. That by grounding ourselves in our emotions and understanding that we're not just talking about a shopping cart, we're talking about other feelings like I feel shame that in the financial situation that I'm in the social situation that I'm in, the cultural situation I'm in, so on, the economic and so on, and I feel shame about that. And so this wish for me to get what I want is my way to quickly escape that sense of shame. So, can we experience a homecoming to our emotions and feel safe again? I think what stays with me is how there is so much more to the experience of, in this case, books in a shopping cart. And if we're able to kind of go below the surface and find out what it is we're feeling, there's a form of connection that may have been lost that we can regain by simply being present and loving towards ourselves. So until next time, thanks a lot, and bye for now.